with comrades in our combat squadrons. Earl Wilburn was a bombardier in the 331st Bomber Group, and there was a B-29 group flying missions over Japan. He was a fascinating guy. He became a very successful lawyer after the war. He was the father of one of my brother's best friends in high school. He was nice enough to do an interview with me many, many years ago, and he told me, he said, you do it for your crew. You do it for each other. You get to lean on each other. A guy named Ray Zucker, who was a pilot in the 8th Air Force, he said, we lived, worked, and flew with such a high degree of concentration and awareness. We could anticipate a course of action just by a quick look or a hand signal. When one gets that close to another individual, thoughts become orders that are executed quickly without hesitation. Certain facts emerge, the most important being the feeling of complete trust, that word, trust, in the ability, and I must add, stability, of every man on the crew. The bond was forged between us, and it will continue as long as we live. The last word goes to Novi, that 19-year-old waist gunner who made it through the tour of duty, who kicked the bomb out of the bomb bay, remember? And he talked about why he thinks he made it through that tour of duty. He said, even when my fears were about to overwhelm me, even when I was physically sick, I kept flying my missions. I didn't want to let my crewmates down. I would rather have them dead. So I tend to think that comradeship is the sustaining motivation for American combat airmen in World War II. I've seen it among ground combat troops, absolutely. It got them through that terror that I talked about, the bleakness of this world, the incredible violence of aerial combat, what I call the deadly skies of World War II. And I definitely think we might all agree that because they found this courage, for lack of a better word, to lay their lives on the line, the world is a better place. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you today.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. You'll notice there are sheets of paper on your tables along with the writing implements. And I know we have at least one veteran here. If you could raise your hand if you're a veteran, I just want to thank you for your service. And so I'll start with the first question here, and that is, what lessons did you learn from your research that can be applied today?
Big question. I hate to be repetitive, but the one that I just told you in a way of combat motivation, because that's one of the things I've seen from studying this now almost 20 years with different kinds of soldiers or airmen or Marines or whatever it would be, is that, you know, when it gets down to people actually doing their jobs in what you might even recognize as a perilous, but not always, but you know, a difficult situation, that the real motivation tends to be for one another. And then I think sometimes as a larger society, we lose sight of that because you know, we're thinking of the larger strategic goals, or we're thinking about blanket patriotism or such concepts as that don't tend to mean a lot to people who are on the so-called sharp end. I think that is definitely an important lesson because it tells you some things about human beings and about human conflict are really timeless. I also, if we're thinking about it at a more macro level, what kind of lessons can we learn is, I hope that someday we can learn to stop dehumanizing America's enemies. That in a way this becomes necessary in war. To shoot at someone, you know, that you have to dehumanize them to an extent. I also think that's one of the reasons why war does happen. Not that the United States is responsible for wars because of dehumanization. I'm not really saying that. But I am saying there tends to be that among those who see combat, that tendency, and then later on, decades later, they reflect on it and regret it. So I think maybe if we could somehow, as human beings, find a way to avoid doing that, maybe there'd be a better world. But I'm a blind optimist, I guess.
Okay, related question, what is the single thing you found in your research that has surprised you the most? Every research, every book that I've done, or just any? Okay. That I'm actually able to do it. Actually able to make it think. I
I would have to say, maybe to piggyback on what I said a moment ago, the sort of the enemy's perspective. Because in a lot of my books, I've tried to get the opposing point of view and give you a sense of what the average German soldier is thinking, or Japanese soldier, or Viet Cong, or whatever it would be, or British soldier in the Battle of New Orleans, because I did a couple of books on the 7th Infantry Regiment, which has been in all the wars, and so it took me back deep into the 19th century. And, I guess the surprising thing is that the other side is kind of thinking and feeling a lot of the same stuff. It's usually a young guy on the other side who doesn't know a whole lot about the politics or the geostrategy of all this stuff and the grand plans we all have. He knows he's tired, he knows he's cold, he knows he's really scared, and he may or may not want to be there, and he's thinking about his family, and so it shouldn't have surprised me, but that would be a bit of an eye-opener. Like, oh, it's the same perspective, and I guess maybe getting older now, I view that as part of the tragedy of war in the first place, that people aren't always that different. Is my opinion.
Okay, somebody asked, I had always heard that more men were killed in the air war in Europe than were killed in the Pacific. So can you talk to that?
I hate to parse, but it depends what we mean. There were about 100,000 Allied and German aircrew who were killed in the war on the Western Front during World War II. Now, that is, I guess technically speaking, that's more than you would have had killed for U.S. arms in the Pacific/Asia War, but you're also counting German losses as well, in addition to Allied losses. As far as per capita deadly, if we're talking about the deadliest jobs you could have in World War II, say on the Allied side, particularly on the American side, certainly infantry soldier is right up there. But bomber crewman, say 1943, the 8th Air Force, was definitely right there in the conversation, like when Jack Novy flew as a waist gunner. The other one, as far as sheer deadliness, would have been submarine crewmen. About 3,500 out of 16,000 die among that, because when your submarine went down, everybody's dead, usually. So technically, that number is correct, I guess, but we could parse it and say, well, no, it was, in terms of American casualties, the Pacific War was still deadlier than just aerial combat alone.
How had aviation combat changed from World War II through Korea and Vietnam? How did the jet engine change things?
Yeah, the jet engine kind of revolutionizes aviation in many respects, but certainly in combat too, because especially for fighters, obviously fighter piloting and fighter encounters are a lot faster now, much more breakneck by the time of the Korean War and certainly the Vietnam War. But ordnance affects it too. Certainly by Vietnam, you have longer range ordnance, Sidewinder missiles, all this kind of stuff that you are kind of killing your enemy plane at distance, sometimes without actually visually seeing them. And so you start to see a little bit more emphasis, at least on the U.S. side, in investing the weight that you carry in an airplane into missiles rather than gunnery, rather than guns. And the pilots kind of push back against this too, because it's like as if you're walking around with a bazooka. Well, that's pretty nice, but if I encounter an enemy 20 feet and in who has a pistol or something, then I'm kind of in trouble, aren't I? So you see the same thing with fighter aircraft in particular. How does the jet affect bombers? Well, it gives them much more range, much more speed, and more payload ultimately too. But what you tend to see by the end of the Vietnam War is air-to-air encounters becoming rarer, becoming less common. And so by the Desert Storm, air-to-air encounters are not all that common. And now the quandary is, where does all that fit in the larger context of a world with drones and whatever else? So yeah, I mean, I think that in that sense, though I don't consider myself any kind of great expert on aerial strategy, you certainly do see some major changes there.
Almost done, but can you maybe speak to the role of the helicopter in Vietnam and how that changed strategy?
Yeah, the helicopter is revolutionary in its own way too, in terms of as especially in terms of ground assault and resupply and ground operations and whatnot. Yesterday at Greenview, we talked a little bit about the use of gliders during World War II, and it's kind of a unique moment in time when you need these kind of transition craft to move people and freight and resupply into places where you've had airborne drops or whatever. The gliders go away because immediately after World War II, the helicopter starts to come into development and has an impact already in Korea, but much more so in Vietnam, in which the helicopter has been perfected such to where it is a weapons carrier of the first order, it is a medical evacuation vehicle, it's a resupply vehicle, it's an air assault vehicle for combat troops. So in a sense, when let's say we're thinking about it as strategists in 1963, before the Vietnam War really escalates from the American point of view, you're thinking, hey, we've got helicopters and we're facing an enemy who could be anywhere and nowhere in a battlefield. So this is a perfect kind of thing. We use air mobility to react to wherever he is and to keep him off guard too, wherever we're landing our people and whatever. So I think certainly it's a major boon to the American war effort, but I think where the helicopters probably have the greatest effect is in medical evacuation. One of the things I mentioned the other day at the Veterans Day event, 81% of American wounded in Vietnam survived. And a major reason was they could be medically evacuated on average within 20 to 30 minutes. And some of you as veterans know better than I. When you have a wounded person, the quicker you can get that person to some sort of permanent medical facility for better care, the better chance they are going to survive. The medevac pilots in Vietnam developed a reputation for courage, which really is almost legendary all these decades later. So obviously the helicopter didn't go away after Vietnam, quite the contrary, but it'll have something in the same role. It'll be very involved with special operations too, especially in our own time. But also the other thing to bear in mind, the helicopter is a little bit of a vulnerable beast too, if the enemy is armed a certain way. If you have strong anti-aircraft guns, if you have enemy helicopters, if you have good ground opposition by the enemy, bunkers, things like that. And the example I would give you is early on in the Iraq War, the 101st Air Assault Division, at that time under General Petraeus, who becomes very famous for other things as the years go on, has a major air assault with its helicopters on Iraqi army positions. And though they didn't lose a lot of lives, fortunately, the helicopters were badly shot up by a force that even could have been better armed. So the helicopter is one of these great implements that you kind of have to spot here and there too, that requires some support too from heavier planes and other weaponry.
Okay, last question, probably the most important one. And that is, if you could choose somebody to fly with from the movie Top Gun. Is it Maverick, Goose, let's see, Iceman, or Joker, right? Is that, who would it be, and why?
What a great question. Probably the best I've ever gotten. It definitely wouldn't be Maverick. Just that name alone, I'm like, no, I'm not flying with you. I'd have to go Iceman, because I like someone who is responsible, who is sober, who is clear-minded, and is accountable to his other folks. I'd say Iceman, but Jester's probably in the conversation too, because he's an extremely experienced pilot, he knows what he's doing, and he's not a daredevil. But that's just me.
That shows the difference in our personalities, because I would choose Goose, because you need a really good wingman, right?
Well, but he's not a pilot.
Oh, that's right, he's a co-pilot.
No, he's a radar.
See, I don't know anything about this stuff. So,
Goose is a great guy.
Goose is a great guy. Anyways, thank you all for coming today. Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you, Professor McManus, for coming all the way from St. Louis to come impart and drop some knowledge on us. I really appreciate that. His book, Deadly Sky, is for sale here. If you're interested, it's $15 and he will sign it. And I appreciate you all for coming out. And thank you very much to the City of Green for making this possible.
And now I have, that one is unique. I know, Sean.